Hey everyone, welcome to Keto and Crime. We are back with day 16 breakdown of the Vallow case taking place in Ada County, Idaho. For the last few weeks, we are on day 16, which translates into yesterday, Tuesday, April 26, 2023. My name is Tracy. I do true crime, dark history, sci-fi, and horror movie and television reviews. I have been fascinated with this case for a long time. I've reviewed all of Chad Daybell's books and summarized them to really get an understanding because I don't love cults, but I love delving into the psychology and the sociology and where cults come from. If you look on my channel, you'll see lots of breakdowns of different cults, including fundamentalist LDS, lots of them. I did a 4-part series on Jim Jones. It's in the People's Temple. It's just fascinating to me, and this is a cult for sure. And so that's the reason I'm so fascinated with everything around this case. I also changed my tree with the holidays. It's still stuck on Easter. That will change. So that being said, I appreciate everyone coming over. If you haven't subscribed, please do. And without further ado or wasting of your time, let's get into this summary, shall we? Okay, right away, I have to give a shout out to the East Idaho News. They are the ones providing the recordings of the trial each night to everyone free of charge, and they are also doing a summary, which helps me go along. I go along with their summary while I'm listening to the recordings, and I'm able to take my notes. So, big shout out to East Idaho News. Also, this is quite humorous in the summary notes. The reporter that is very diligently taking these said that Lori had on her best grandmother look, that she looks a lot older than she normally would. You know, in the past we've seen her that dollar store Barbie look. Well, now she's going for dollar store granny. And I'm not talking about Dollar General level. I'm talking about Family Dollar. So no offense to anyone that works at Family Dollar, but you know, there's a difference there. So that's what she's looking like, and I think it's hilarious that the reporter threw that in. So shout out to East Idaho News for having a sense of humor. So let's dive into it. And so we continue with questioning, with the prosecuting attorneys questioning FBI Special Agent Steve Daniels. Now, he was the one that was on the stand when we closed out the last video. He was going over crime scene pictures and geolocations, conditions of the body. There was a lot of very graphic photographs of both JJ and Tylee's remains, as well as the Daybell crime scene as well. So he is the one that is still on the stand. The prosecutor questions him about what did he believe the mindset of these people were that was burying this. And of course, he really can't speak to mindset, but what he can speak to is the fact that he said he's excavated approximately 5 to 7 of these crime scenes, and he says that this, in his opinion, of all those 7, is the most precise and the most effort taken to get rid of, bury, conceal these remains. He says they were very carefully cut up, buried in hopes that they would decompose before anyone could find them. He also talked about how actually very difficult it is to hide a body. I know I joke because, you know, I'm a true crimer and I think I know everything, that I could probably hide a body and get away with it. Most likely I couldn't. I would make about a zillion mistakes. And he talks about how hard it really is and that a lot of effort was taken here to conceal. He then talks about how after a body decomposes, if it's just buried straight in the dirt, how the dirt will level and how they can tell that there's possibly a body of some sort buried there. And then he talked about the digging around the pond, which turned out to be JJ's final resting place. He talked about digging in until he found the planks that were kind of separating the top. It was like they were making a very huge effort to level the dirt, because there was planks over the plastic bag that contained, the white plastic bag that contained JJ's remains. So he said once he removed those planks, and they found JJ's skull and the rest of his remains. So definitely some thought went into this. I mean, they thought they were evil geniuses. They were, they weren't evil geniuses. They were evil. The only term that comes to mind, and I don't want to be insulting to anybody, but they were remedial evil. They were evil remedial students, not geniuses. So he then goes into pictures of the tools that were used. He explained all the tools. He talked about the duct tape that is present on these bodies and a lot of bodies. He said that duct tape actually can contain a lot of evidence. People don't realize. They think once the body decomposes that there's nothing there. It was duct tape that had a lot to do with the conviction of a lot of serial killers and killers. So people, that is not a, he's kind of putting out and debunking a lot of myths that we see in movies and things like that. And he then talked about the dirt and other stuff that really showed just how, the thing he was pressing is that definitely a lot of effort went into hiding both these bodies. Rob Wood, who is the prosecutor questioning Daniels, followed up with one very simple final question. He asked Daniels to describe the difference between JJ and Tylee's burial sites, and he said there was a big difference, even though they took a lot of care to conceal all of it, that JJ's remains were all intact, wrapped in plastic bags, very coordinated with rocks and wooden planks, and it was, much, I guess, for lack of a better term, more well done. Tylee's burial site was a mass of organic material. Now, that is Daniel's exact words. All her parts kind of fell apart. They were charred. She had been chopped up, burned. He said he can't really conjecture why the difference. Now, I have a lot of really great subscribers and channel members on this channel, and in our live streams, one of the things that they have talked about is that it looks like the difference between the way the bodies were buried from a psychological standpoint, there was a lot more anger with Tylee's and how she was treated. So most likely they didn't really like her. She probably fought them. She probably inflicted some damage. I hope she did. I hope she kicked them right in the nuts. And so they were probably angry with her, and so they cut her up and they burned her to get that final revenge because they're sick sons of bitches. And JJ, a little more care, maybe because he was special needs and he was the baby. I mean, this is all conjecture. I don't know, but I'm reading between the lines of what Daniel said. And he said there was a night and day's difference between the two burial sites. Next, the witness is tendered to the defense, and John Thomas is questioning him. He asks him more about his experience and how many, all those barrels he covered, where they were. He said they were in Utah, Idaho, Montana, so that whole Western Plains area. He asked him more about the logistics of how a crime scene is sifted. He said there are protocols, but lots of times it depends on the area in which the bodies are buried. He also kind of asked him some more specific questions about this crime scene and how the evidence was checked, and then he is dismissed. They didn't necessarily say that he was still under subpoena, but I have a feeling he probably is. Next up for the prosecution is Dr. Garth Warren, MD. He is a forensic pathologist working for the Idaho coroner, the county coroner there, where the bodies would have been sent out of county. And he takes the stand. He's the one that did some of the autopsy and other studies after the bodies were excavated. He's asked about his credentials. He goes over where he went to college and medical school and how long he trained to go into law enforcement. He says that he performs 200 to 250 autopsies a year, and he said that 1,500 murder cases that he is, or deaths that had questionable circumstances, he has done the post-mortem there in Idaho. So a lot of deaths in Idaho have to go to the coroner. He says he investigates homicides, suicides, accidents, and that he and his entire team do that in the coroner's office. He says that his main prospect is to determine how they died and as much factual knowledge around those deaths that he can do. That is, he's trying to help the police set up a story of how these people died, construct it, put it together, and so that they can better prosecute these cases. He's asked about if manners of death from accidental to natural to murder or suicide, if it's easy or more difficult to tell the difference. And he says, every case is different, but it is very obvious if there was, foul play in most cases. He asked him to define what an unattended death is, and he said that an unattended death is that someone dies outside a hospital without a doctor. So he said that that's usually what they have to do for the ones that they have to do these autopsies on. He said if they die in the hospital and the doctors know the cause of death, it's usually optional for an autopsy. But if you die outside a doctor's care, they're going to autopsy you. So that's kind of the delineation. He says he's done autopsies on fully intact bodies where all the fluids and everything are collected and inspected. He's also done quote-unquote autopsies on remains. And so that's where we get into the autopsy he conducted on June 11th, 2020 on JJ's remains. He pretty much plainly says that he died of asphyxia by plastic bag over the head and duct tape over the mouth. He said that his hands and legs were immobilized by duct tape. So these bastards didn't even have the mercy of the God they claim to worship to put this young man out of his misery quickly. They put duct tape over his mouth, put a plastic bag over his head, and let him suffocate. Sorry. He said that he received JJ's body in a body bag. He opened it. They did not unwrap JJ or do anything like that, so he got it fully intact. He talked about the obvious signs of homicide that jumped out: the white plastic bag over his head, the duct tape all the way around the neck, which probably means it had fallen from the mouth after decay and just fallen off. Forearms and the hands were bound with duct tape, and the ankles were found with duct tape. He was wearing a red pajama top, red pajama bottoms, and black socks. He said that the body and the clothes were in an obvious state of decomposition. He found what were obviously scratch-like abrasions on the side of JJ's necks. He said that after the plastic bag was removed, it was sent over to law enforcement to be tagged as evidence. All of the fingernails were cut and given to law enforcement. They did oral, anal, and penile swabs in case sexual abuse was involved, and they took a portion of various bones and teeth for evidence as well. There were bruises on the left arm. There was a bruise under the right thumbnail. There were other areas that were concerning or suspicious, quote unquote. There were bruising on the ankles. So basically, it looks like he was forcibly tied up, and there was a lot of different things. He said there were no rib fractures. He did not see anything unusual in the lungs. Now, usually the lungs are a telltale sign in a lot of the cases, I think. If they were buried, alive or something like that, there's going to be debris in the lungs. He did not find any of that here. So obviously he was asphyxiated by blocking the mouth and the nose. Due to the state of the decomposition of JJ's liver, they did go ahead and extract a portion and send it for a full tox screen. And they did report caffeine and theobromine, which are naturally occurring stimulants that are found in cocoa, soda, tea. But he did find traces of ethanol alcohol and GHB, which has both medical uses and also a street drug. It is a antidepressant. So yeah, that was weird. I'm not sure. I have not studied to see exactly what medications JJ had been on, so it could be that those were natural, but that should be there. But when I hear GHB, having once been a club kid, my antennas go up. Though he did say that the levels were inconclusive, so there was no way to tell if it was what could happen naturally after you die, that it's not unusual, or if he was given it. So we don't really know. And then they break into a quick break. Questioning continues after the recess, and Rob Wood moves to admit autopsy photos of JJ. Of course, John Thomas objects. After a lot of back and forth, the judge rules that it is overruled and they will be admitted. So there's going to be about 3 dozen photos admitted. But they want a sidebar, so they go into judge's chambers, and there's kind of a break until they return. And so when they return, there's kind of a compromise reached. Judge Boyce said that he will allow all of them to be admitted and shown, but only shown to the people that need to see them, i.e. the jury and the attorneys. So monitors are put up and they are shown that way, not in the gallery at large, because they don't want that stuff getting out. They were pretty gruesome, as you can imagine. So they go through all the photos. It takes over an hour, and each one of them is described to the jury, what they were looking for and what they found. And then after that, we move on to Tylee's autopsy that took about a week. And they talk about how he went about doing that autopsy and what he found. He said this autopsy was a bit different. Whereas JJ had some flesh and organs remaining, it was totally different for Tylee. It was pretty much just skeletal remains, so there was no toxicology done. So they did their best to get as much tissue as they could from the remains, and so he went about how he was able to kind of piece her body back together, to take tissue samples, and because of the burning and the charring, mostly decomposed, he did what he could to reconstruct the body and do the same kind of tests that he did on JJ to kind of put together a story of what happened. He talked about all of the burned away bits and pieces. There were some organs that were never found. Her bones were charred, dirty. They were, basically had been through the ringer, but he could not pinpoint a cause of homicide because of the condition of her body. And then they moved to go to lunch break. After the break, Rob Wood continues questioning Dr. Warren. He asked him about how they rank homicide by unspecified means. He goes through all the protocols for that. But then he did ask the doctor, in his opinion, was this a homicide? And he said, yes, I just can't tell you exactly why, because of the condition of the body. Then they decide to put forth the photos of Tylee's body or remains, and of course there's the same objections from the defense. They come up with the same meet in the middle, that only this time they will allow the public to see some of the photos on the big monitor, but the most graphic will only be on the small monitors for the jury and the attorneys. And so they go through kind of the same process, going over each photo with Dr. Warren describing what it is, and the prosecution asking clarifying questions. Again, takes about an hour to an hour and a half, and then prosecution tenders the witness. John Thomas stands up to cross-examine. He again goes over his qualifications, his education. Then he asks him who's in the room when autopsies are done. He explains all of that. And then he asks if the autopsy was recorded. Warren says no, there was no video or audio recorded autopsies. just a little more specific about what he found. He was basically asking him how he come up with his conclusions that it was a homicide, and he goes through the same conjecture. The condition of the body, kind of elicits to the fact it was a homicide. And then he basically tells Thomas, if you find zero reason for them to be dead, and it's reasonably conclude that there was no accident, then the only other opinion is homicide. So, yeah. Dr. Warren is then dismissed, remains under subpoena. Prosecution calls Dr. 𝗪𝗓𝗄𝗃 Christensen, who is a forensic anthropologist for the FBI in 𝗠𝘂𝘀𝗶𝗰, Virginia. She describes her credentials as forensic anthropology as a specialized area that includes analysis of skeletal remains called in because of the condition of the bodies here. She talks about how they did a CT scan of Tylee's remains, and she found over 100 bones that belonged to Tylee Ryan. She basically described all major parts of the skeletal system, what she does, how they test them, and that she said that she found bones representing all parts of the major skeletal system from Tylee Ryan. She said that the sharp edges on the bones reflect that they've probably impacted by a sharp tool. That could have been during burial or before burial, but that's what her findings alluded to. She also said that on the portions of Tylee's left and right femur, the backside of these bones found carnivore activity, which means animals had been, doing what animals do. Then she looked at a picture of Tylee's skull and said that the actual condition of the bones were altered from heat. Again, lots of evidence on Tylee was inconclusive because of the condition of the body. So that's where we are. I did take away that probably they both fought for their lives. I would say Tylee, they had a lot more hatred for Tylee. Again, this is an opinion. And then the bruises and everything on JJ, I'm sure he struggled too. So that's where we stand. I will be back as soon as day 17 drops, and we'll get that out to you as soon as I can. Until next time, keep on crime.